So I would like to welcome everyone to the online webinar on the topic, do organizations need Scrum Masters or not? The topic was triggered by Mike on LinkedIn for about 4 weeks ago. The goal of today is to have a great discussion on the subject, and maybe we will know at the end if there's a conclusion or not. I'm Pascal, I'm the moderator for today. I'm here to keep the calm and make it useful to all. I'm also here to allow participants to join the discussion with deepening questions and opinions. In the panel are also Mike, Michael, and Jurgen. I will ask them in a minute to introduce themselves, and then we will kick off the discussion. The session is being recorded for public purpose. I will keep an eye on the webinar chat for furthering interesting questions that could enrich the conversation. And I would like to invite every participant to ask questions that could enrich the conversation. Just type them in the chat window. So maybe now I would like to ask Mike, Michael, and Jurgen, please introduce yourselves briefly. Thank you.
All right, shall I start? I'm not sure if we all see the same sort of grouping of people from left to right. I see myself on the left. Not sure if everybody sees themselves on the left. So thanks first of all, to everyone here on the channel. Thanks, Pascal. Thanks for Jurgen. Thanks, Michael. Me, myself, I'm an Agile coach. I mainly work today on enterprise level. We'll probably see what that means in a few minutes, which also led me to this sort of discussion. And I'm based in Vienna, Austria, Europe, for those who might have joined from America. It's not the kangaroo country, so just to let you know.
The other one, okay. Thank you, Mike. Michael.
Hey there. Yeah, thank you for the invitation. Also from my side, thanks everybody. I'm looking forward to an interesting conversation. I think we've a hot topic on the agenda today. Regarding myself, I consider myself as an Agile practitioner, basically. I think I'm mostly interested in taking out products to the people, and yeah, that's what I'm doing I've been doing for the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years in a Scrum and Agile environment. And I think the Scrum Master was a very useful pattern a while ago, and I think it isn't any longer.
Great. Let's go to Jurgen.
Yeah, so I consider myself a Scrum Master. I'm doing Scrum since 1998, so 20 years this year, so that's quite a long period. Yes, I have called myself Agile coach in the past. I make this mistake still today. So that's why I was very intrigued by Mike's comment on LinkedIn, which triggered this complete webinar. So I'm also the remark of Michael to going and saying, okay, Scrum Master has served its purpose, it's done. I have a different opinion. I respect both of them in the phone call, so we know each other for a long time also already. And this is going to be very interesting. I hope.
I'm sure.
Yes, thank you. Maybe we can start by just the questions that were in the LinkedIn comment. Mike, I believe you triggered them. Do you still know the initial questions that triggered the whole thing?
Yeah, maybe I'm going to start with it. Well, yeah, just opening the discussion, I think there is a lot of potential perspectives into this. And the point where I started was actually, first of all, to see, organizations as a whole being after something like Agile, which is already a potential weird perspective because they might rather expect agility, but they get lost with Agile, which is something referred to as an Agile manifesto in usual terms. Agility is an attribute, it might be a competence, something maybe beyond. Now, if we think about a whole enterprise and compare it to a method like Scrum, we see a lot of companies, going for many, many teams doing something together. But, Scrum was initially still a method created or developed emerging from multiple disciplines for smaller groups of people, basically single teams actually. And well, we early saw probably a couple of teams doing something together, but there was never the scope for Scrum itself, the method itself for a whole company. Now, what do we see on the market? There is a lot of companies, who are engaged Scrum as a main, let's say, approach for gaining more agility. And what happens now is actually, well, there is more topics than just Scrum and some product development at the table and at stake when it comes to more agility. So whether we have to have a conversation with the C-level board, whether we have to talk about different approaches for financing, how we maybe change the HR department, maybe how to integrate legal, whatever it is, there's probably, if you have a few hundred thousands, 10,000 and more people in an organization, that becomes quite complex. Now, the scenario which triggered my initial thought here was, whom do we see showing up as change agents to help this whole organization on multiple levels to, move further? It's a lot of, in a lot of cases, it's Scrum Masters. And what happens then, Scrum Masters are Scrum Masters, if they are Scrum Masters or Masters of Scrum. So this basically means we start discussing Scrum around topics which might be somewhere related to some teamwork in many areas. But well, what I just said as scenarios, this is not about Scrum. This is about agility of the whole company. This might involve any other practice, whatever you know or learn from or might experience or discover. But there is no help for limited views here to a single team-oriented framework. And I immediately come to the point to say, well, adding some complicated scaling framework, which one might know from any market, doesn't help a lot here. So this was the initial, thing to say, let's differentiate something on a team level where Scrum Master is a certain role. But if we go in for the agility of the whole organization, this is a limited perspective, and that actually what I triggered the discussion from my point, sometimes maybe even not helpful, because then Scrum Masters might jump in with a big bias and start driving something into directions which are not helpful.
Okay, I think Jurgen.
Yeah, well, I think there are a couple of things. So Scrum and it's like team. I don't think Scrum is for a one team or not for an organization. I also think Scrum is not about process and roles. It's like Scrum is more like your mother-in-law. She will point out all the deficiencies and the things that are going wrong with you, but not fix them. You need to fix them yourself. And that's where Scrum is about. I think also on enterprise level, organizations can benefit from that. What I do like, what Mike was mentioning, is nobody is benefiting from complicated structures in a complex environment. I'm very much into, if you're in a complex environment and you need simple things. So if we say we scale Scrum and not Scrum teams, which I think Mike has met often and which I see often happening in organizations as well. So that's where I align with Mike. So if organizations think like, let's have hundreds of Scrum teams and put complicated structures on top of that, I don't think this is very useful. It's not going to give you the transparency as you need to have. And I think this is the main role of a Scrum Master. Make sure the transparency is there for an organization to continuously uncover better ways to become more agile in that sense, to become more flexible, to become more adjustable, to serve their customers in a better, more appropriate way in their context. And context is also dependent. So if you have a context, for example, telecom operators where we work in at this moment in time, but also we work for example, in a printing industry, that's different. That's where I like the simplicity of Scrum in a complex world, and also having the Scrum Master there, I think, is a necessary thing, in the sense that the Scrum Master is not only towards a team, and not even like Scrum team only. If I say Scrum team, it means product owner and development team. In my context, there's only one team, and that's the development team. Product owner can serve multiple of those teams, but that's another discussion most probably. But also serve the organization. And it's about making Scrum work for the organization, for the enterprise, and always looking like, how can we make sure that the necessary transparency is there? And I think definitely in an enterprise organization, this is a full-time job. Thinking about the political boundaries, the struggles that are there, and what transparency will bring into the organization. And I think the Scrum Master has more than a full-time job in that sense. Michael, now up to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think it was the question that Mike raised. So how do we distinguish Agile coaches and Scrum Masters, which triggered my basically spontaneous answer: ditch it. We don't need it. And that's for several reasons actually. I do understand all the points that you brought up, Jurgen, and I think they do make sense. But I wonder whether that must be sort of associated to one specific role on a team or in the organization. And I was specifically arguing that we should ditch it from the org chart. We don't need a predefined Scrum Master role that serves the purpose that you just mentioned. And that's for I think essentially three reasons. Where the first one is it's especially when we're talking of scaling and Scrum becomes more popular. It supports the impression that Scrum is the goal. It's where we want to end up, and we need the Scrum Master to get there. Which is, I know you're nodding and you're sharing the opinion, probably, but I see that out there in organization. I see people saying, "No, we can't do that. That's not Scrum." And I see Scrum Master saying, "No, you can't do that. That's not Scrum." And that's so it sort of supports an attitude which I think is not very helpful in terms of becoming more agile or getting products out. And secondly, I think Scrum Masters really are in a difficult position because they're sort of on a continuous balancing act. I think if you want to coach a team effectively, you need to take an outside stance. And that's very difficult for a Scrum Master to get who's working closely with a team on a daily basis. Yeah, and I know there's ways around that, but I think the shortest path is to, yeah.
I can't help myself. So why would you think like a Scrum Master is just like day to day in working with the team? I think this is the misconception that has been driven by certification organisms, most probably like Scrum Alliance and maybe also Scrum, where people think like, okay, I need to take care of the team. And I think this is the biggest misconception that we have, is that Scrum Masters think like, this is my team. I rather have, and definitely in enterprise organizations, if we go back to Mike, enterprise organization and the Scrum Masters will need to collaborate as a community together and make sure that they use each other's strengths to make sure that teams grow, but not only teams, the organization is growing. Some of the problems teams will have will make you feel very uncomfortable as a Scrum Master. And if you do not work as a team and you think this is my team, then you will still and most probably keep avoiding going into this kind of confrontation. So I prefer to have working as a Scrum Master team to make Scrum work for the organization, tapping into each other's specialties, pretty much like you would have other cross-functional teams and feature teams tapping into each other's specialties to make it work. I think this is a crucial aspect if we go into larger organizations.
Absolutely, but from that point of view, I would rather say, well, you were mentioning you are the Scrum Master and specifically not an Agile coach. Maybe that's an interesting conversation as well, because I have the my answer to this inside out dilemma would be to ditch the inside sort of Scrum Master idea, but then you ultimately into a coaching into a good coaching stance, and I think that's where you can be where you can effectively serve as an Agile coach rather than as a Scrum Master. Yeah.
How many Agile coaches do you know that actually have a coaching certificate, but really truly a coaching certificate, and not something invented in the Agile community where you can easily get it? Most of the real true coaching certificates, you need this kind of multi-year journey to go through.
Yeah, how many? I don't know. Maybe can I answer with a question? How many Scrum Masters do you know that have a Scrum Master certificate and still lacking experience to do the job?
Yeah, do a lousy job. I knew this was coming.
This is an interesting point, Jurgen. And I mean, it's really a complicated discussion, if not complex, not talking about these differences, but really to say, let's start with the initial, idea of Scrum. I mean, this is quite a long time ago that it was invented. Didn't change a lot, to be honest. And you mentioned Scrum Alliance, whatever organization, certification body. But if we refer to the Scrum Guide, it's still helpful to define the Scrum Guide as one of the sources of information. Because if we are not clear about what kind of Scrum we're talking about, then it's even less helpful for anyone out there. Now, if we look at the Scrum Guide, I mean, to be honest, it's still a team-based game. It is still a team-based game. Now, if we and it's still about product development, by the way. I don't need to talk about software. Of course, we can take it product. But, let's be honest. I mean, this whole thing was coming from software. And we know, moving further, we are still experiencing ideas how it could work in other circumstances, specifically when it's getting larger. And, Jurgen, you are an expert in this field, working with less and, approaches like scaling to large degrees, where everyone actually says, first of all, don't. I mean, this is a key message in less. First of all, if you can do it with smaller size, with less teams, then go for this. On the other hand side, there is reality, and that's what I mean when I talk about enterprise. I mean, of course, I can tell them, guys, what you're doing, what you have been doing is shit with your bank, with your insurance company, with your 10,000, 100,000 people. I think Daimler has about 300,000 people, but I'm not sure how they can play around with little teams to get the bigger stuff out, while at the same time, they even might not need Scrum for solve specific problems, which are still relevant to become more agile. But agile is now something for agility. So that's why I love to distinguish and say Scrum was invented for something, and it was proven to work there in a smaller context for single teams, but it has no good track record at the bigger scale. I would even say, and this is an additional challenge here, that the Agile Manifesto was basically talking about smaller environments and smaller teams, but it actually failed a lot. I mean, how many great larger Agile initiatives did we see over the last 20 years? How many Agile transformations did really succeed? So the Agile Manifesto is actually lacking the context for the larger environments.
I disagree in the sense that how many large Agile things did we see working? If you mean large with hundreds of thousands of people, then I think maybe the modern organizations and new organizations don't need hundreds of thousands of people. That's one thing, but keep this aside.
No, I'm just talking about more than 10 people.
So there are many of them. If you just purely look at the Agile Manifesto in that sense, then we could consider Spotify as a good organization. We could also consider Netflix as a good organization. If you listen to Pixar, then you could say, okay, this is also pretty much Agile according to its values, not the principles. So its values.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
what I do believe is it's Agile is coming, and I think the first sentence a lot of people tend to forget, and I think this is the most important one. We are uncovering better ways, so it's a never-ending story. There is no one Agile, and I agree with you. Too many people think Agile equals Scrum, and that's plain wrong. The only thing I see is that Scrum is helping organizations acquiring more of an agility and flexibility by providing this mirror to uncover better ways, because Scrum is not giving you a way of working. It doesn't give you anything. The only thing is a framework so that you as an organization can start uncovering better ways. And that's where Scrum Master should be. It's not enforcing, it's not being the team mom or the team caretaker in that sense. It's about helping the organization uncovering better ways on how to get things done for them and their context.
Okay.
You raised some interesting examples. Just to add to this, I mean, just taking Pixar. Pixar is, applying a lot of techniques and following values and working in an agile way, but they don't use Scrum. So for their success, Scrum was not really involved. Similar practices and quite similar principles. Same for Spotify, by the way, even. I think nobody at Spotify, or at least 90% of people, are doing something they call Scrum-esque. Everybody's free to do anything. And they, now adding to Michael, they don't have a role called Scrum Master because they have Agile coaches. There is no Scrum Master at Spotify, at least not alive. So this is good examples that whole agility and success on product development is totally detached from the tiny little methods we have here.
I find it a bit of a pity, and definitely like experts like the two of you, which I respect very much, or going away from Scrum Master, going into Agile coaching or not Agile coaching, and then all of that other naming. Because, in my opinion then, because in the world, most of the Scrum Master positions are being filled by people. They might be very good people, they might be very pleasant people to work with, but they don't have the skills acquired yet to really be a Scrum Master in that sense. And because of that, they stick to what they feel comfortable with, the small complexity of a team instead of to the enterprise and the organizational parts. Well, if you read the Scrum Guide, you serve to the team, that's correct. But I think also there you need different skill sets. So most probably work with Scrum Masters together to make it work. You serve to the product owner. But what I think is very important and mostly forgotten is you serve to the organization. And that's where we generally see Agile coaches in. Do I go into organization as an Agile coach? Yes, of course. I think the main reason why an Agile coach has been invented in the past is because consultancy firms wanted to have more money being paid to Agile coaches. And then they make a difference because they saw Scrum Master is actually being bound to the team, development team. So we need somebody else. This is a problem. This is a problem. We see Scrum Masters only acting on team level. That's a problem. And a larger organization with money, if they have a problem, what do? They invent a role for it. So we invent a role, Agile coach, and we say, your role is the organization. And then the problem is fixed, just like many other things that we come into. If we have a problem, and definitely organizations with lots of money, they just invent a role for it, they create it, and off you go. And then you always have, especially larger consulting companies, jumping on that phenomenon and making it even bigger. And I think that's the biggest issue why we are sitting here today. Not us, not our opinion, but this kind of dynamics that happened in the past.
I still have these 3 points in mind, which triggered me to the initial statement of ditching the Scrum Master, because I think the term Scrum Master also triggers false expectations in organizations, and especially in larger organizations. I think you're better off when you do not have that role, because in the first place it's not about Scrum. Agile is not Scrum about Scrum in the first place, and then associated to that role, as you said, there is we are supporting the product owner, we're supporting the organization, we're supporting the team, and that's all good and helpful. But you need to solve this inside out dilemma in a way. Now, if you get past that dilemma, you're still sort of bound to the fact that everybody's talking about Scrum, where it might be wise to see Scrum as a good starting point, but not as the goal. It's a good starting point where you should develop from. You should take responsibility for the way you develop your products as a team and as an organization. And I think the Scrum Master role sort of limits the creativity of how we could actually approach things. And yeah, the fact that you mentioned Spotify is a good example, actually.
Well, I agree. Yeah? So Agile or Scrum or Spotify model or Save or Less or DAD or Rage or Scrum at Scale or Kiwis for that matter can never be the goal to achieve. So the goal to achieve should somewhere be related more to the business impact or to the ecological impact that you have as an organization. But if chosen for Scrum, then I prefer to use a Scrum Master role as it is and try to teach the organizations and teach people that, okay, if you have Scrum Masters, then Agile coaches are obsolete, because what you call Agile coaches are Scrum Masters in that sense. If you do not use Scrum as a method to reflect on a continuous basis to uncover better ways to get shit done, to be honest, then most probably this kind of activity, external but also a little bit internal, Michael, I think both are needed. So, but definitely the external part will belong to somebody else. And I think in Spotify they are called tribe coaches and chapter coaches and other coaches. Also there, I to be honest, I think in the Agile world, by using the word coach so many times, I think we show disrespect to the profession of a coach. Just like in many organizations, the people calling themselves Scrum Master are not really professional about Scrum Mastering. They earn their money with being a Scrum Master, but they are not professional about Scrum Mastering. Similar thing if you go to software development, I see in a lot of organizations people type in code and earn their money, but I would never call them professional software engineers for that matter.
But Jurgen, I think it's helpful, just before we enter here, I think just another command. It's helpful maybe to look at the community or practitioners in relation to the coach word, to say probably not everybody means real life coaching. Probably a lot of, I might point to America, I'm not sure if there is I see different approaches how Scrum and Agile work methods are taken in America versus Europe. Is, the metaphor might be more of a sports coach. And being a sports coach is just different from, scope, goal, objective approach than from coaching as we might see it more on the European scale. Doesn't mean in America there is no also, tribe into this direction, but we might not just compare it to life coaching. So therefore, this is even a more complicated topic. But I think, Pascal, you wanted to point already to the...
There are some great comments coming in from the attendees, connecting to what you just said about the coach being close to the team. So I will give you some statements and maybe you can elaborate on those. Just Sonia says, why can't I be both? I'm now acting as an Agile coach at enterprise level, and the company has both roles. Scrum Masters are closer to the work of the teams on a daily basis, and Agile coaches are working on enterprise level.
I'd love to comment on this one, because I think there's two sides that needs to be considered. First of all, I think it's absolutely important, and we had this the comment before, to be close to the team and understand the team problems if you want to fix those problems, which is very hard if you're outside the team. Now, if you're an Agile coach working on enterprise level and you drop in for a retrospective every couple of weeks, you lose touch. You can't help fix those problems effectively, and that's why I'm saying we don't need Scrum Masters still, because those who should actually take responsibility for fixing those problems are the experts in the field. So if you have a development problem, you should have, as a team, you should have the flexibility, the skills, and the mandate to fix those problems. And you should not put it onto the shoulders of your Scrum Masters, who is then carrying it away, and who will eventually return after a couple of weeks with the glorified answer, right? So I think it's important to leave the responsibility to the team, and even for that, you don't need the Scrum Master. And of course, you can serve as an Agile coach then.
Okay, Jurgen has started sharing his screen.
Yeah, a little bit too soon. Sorry, Michael. So keep finishing. What I want to share is this very simple diagram about the, let's say, in time, the focus of being a Scrum Master. Initially, it's most probably going to be like the Scrum guy is saying towards a product owner and a team, and you will see it's going down pretty much at the same pace, because there cannot be a faster pace of teams growing into the maturity of applying Scrum and using the empiricism, so the agile practices as well, to uncover better ways than the product owner. The relationship towards both are two sides to say, okay, they move in a different pace. So they do move in a similar pace, and attention can go down from a Scrum Master. If you have teams that are very mature and working together with product owner, finding refinements, delivering through valuable, impactful increments every sprint, then you can loosen up the attention a bit there. But then the attention will go to the organization, the rest of the organization. I mean HR, I mean finance. If the internal organization is done, I mean suppliers, I mean customers. So this is the rest of the organization. And if we are done with this, we cannot forget about the development practices or technical excellence. This is mainly software, but also in other domains you find similar things. It's like, what is the top-notch new practices, technologies coming up so that we can actually create value a lot faster. If you consider the full picture, then you see we don't have Superman in-house, so there cannot be one Scrum Master doing all of that. So also there you already see the need of working as a team in that sense. And a couple of people most probably work internally, and a couple of people will most probably work externally. If I call myself a Scrum Master and I go in an organization, even though they hire me as an Agile coach, because I'm too expensive, they need to internally say I'm an Agile coach, because otherwise they cannot say this is the amount, the day rate applicable. But when people ask me, who are you? I always say I'm a Scrum Master. And Pascal can comply to this as one of our customers. I just say, I'm a Scrum Master. The only thing, the first thing I get questioned is, who's your team? Like, I don't have a team. My management, the organization is the team in that sense, because I close to never work directly with one or two teams in that sense.
Now, let me add something to this. I really like this diagram, first of all. And on the other hand side, there's one interesting observation. I think people like Ken Schwaber once said, if you're doing something which is, not really what we describe Scrum Guide, don't please call it Scrum. Now, we probably meant the people who start with Scrum and keep tweaking already in the beginning and making some bad things out of it. But now I'm moving forward to the time scale on your diagram. So I assume here's a mature team, and I hope after 1 to 2 years, or maybe half a year, I don't know, depends upon the organization, they're not doing anything anymore as it is prescribed in the Scrum Guide. They will do a lot of different things, whatever they do, as it's happening in Spotify. So as per Ken Schwaber, at this point in your diagram, we shouldn't call it Scrum anymore. That's for the team. Now, if we don't have a Scrum team anymore, we don't need a Scrum Master anymore. That's one conclusion. It's a nice one, but it helps a lot here because the team is way more mature than a Scrum Guide ever thought about and can do, because we're working in a complex environment on complex products. How could a simple game rule book like the Scrum Guide, describe how the future in the next 10 years looks like? Now we move up to the organization. And that's where I like what Sonia said, obviously. Having been a Scrum Master, why shouldn't I be an Agile coach? I can also be at the same time the same. But at least I would think about, working with the organization, once again, when it's about agility, probably maybe finding 50%, if at all, applicable stuff from Scrum in this direction. Why should I squeeze the C-level into a Scrum team when they can approach different ways of working together, because they are not producing a product? I know these complicated times when people have to say, well, it's virtually a product. Well, actually it's a service, so let's call it somehow a product, and we squeeze it into Scrum. No, they're working as a team. They're working on stuff together with HR, together with legal, whatever it is. They're working with product portfolio teams. So there is probably more than 50% non-Scrum problems at the table. whether it's about innovation, we're going into the innovation space, you know, we're creating a new company, whatever it is. This is all about business agility, creating agility for the organization. They need and can make sense of facilitation here, but why should I call myself a Scrum Master, or vice versa? If I come as a Scrum Master, I actually have a bias or actually have an agenda to say, let's bring Scrum in here. So let's make clear which hat I'm wearing. So I think that's my interpretation of your diagram, which logically makes a lot of sense from an evolutionary based approach, from the maturity level of the organization, from the maturity level of the individuals in terms of experience, in terms of scope. But, you know, that's where the roles may even come into our way.
Yeah, Mike, so how many organizations do you know that actually are that mature that they could go, and I will now explicitly say, beyond Scrum? The thing for me is Scrum is not about the roles and not the process. It's about making sure that we use the time to have this kind of double loop learning, one on the product service we are developing, and one internally on how we get value impact delivered to our customers. So do I think you can grow beyond that thing? Definitely. So there are definitely organizations that most probably grew beyond that thing. But I think most of the organizations out there, not to say 90% of the organizations, are not even capable of dealing, and I will just say dealing with the transparency Scrum brings. And that's why Scrum is being rejected. That's why Scrum Masters are being put towards a team level and not on the enterprise level. Because on enterprise level, we cannot cope with the transparency through Scrum is bringing in that sense. So we want to customize to special needs, just to make sure that we don't need to deal with some of those things. I think it's a Scrum Master's job and responsibility to teach the organization on how to deal with it, and then, like you mentioned, grow even beyond that stuff.
I think every team I've been working with actually grew beyond Scrum very fast. I think as soon as you take responsibility for the way you create value for your audience, you need to figure out how you're going to approach it, and at that point Scrum is a good starting point, but it will ultimately deviate rather quickly.
But if we want agile, flexible organizations, and then we say, okay, let's start with Scrum. Let's just take it as a starting point, not an end point. I definitely don't.
Yeah, right. But that's people's mind. It creates these misconceptions that it's the end point. I think also
the first thing that we do as an agile community, allow to have a hierarchy of coachings. Scrum Master is on team level, and on top of that, we have agile coaches on enterprise level, and then it becomes again the same hierarchical misery as we always had.
Exactly. So ditch the Scrum Masters, and it's flat.
So it's about business agility, right? That's what we want. Yeah. Okay. I have again an interesting comment.
If the question was, if I've answered the question, no, I don't want business agility.
Okay. So what do you want?
I think it's. I think it's. Oh,
I think that's a good topic for another conversation, probably, because we had a conversation regarding the Agile Big A, as in the Agile Manifesto, and the business agility, and all sorts of other sorts of Agile. But I think that would eventually be too big of a conversation for today. Regarding the Scrum Master, I think there is a third issue that I'm having, and again, a major reason why I think we should get rid of the role, not of the job of this, not of the function, right? So everything that the Scrum Master does still needs to be done, but we don't need a specific role for it. And very often we see anti-patterns in organizations, and I know you can get around it, but it's still directing. We're still heading towards those anti-patterns in almost all organizations that I'm seeing. And one is the the nanny, the team nanny, or the team mom, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, I see people out there organizing meetings, writing protocols, carrying pin boards around, whatsoever a nanny would do, and taking over responsibility for the kids that can't take those responsibilities yet because they're not mature enough. I don't know. I think it's just another anti-pattern, and it's closely related to the fact that we have this Scrum Master role in organizations. And I think also it might have been useful a long time ago when nobody knew about Agile, nobody knew about Scrum, and also maybe the skill set that development teams come along these days is different than 20, 15 or 15 years ago, right? So if you have a team that you recruit sort of directly from the Big Bang Theory, and you need to make that team work, probably you need 2 Scrum Masters and 2 cat herders to get along. I don't know, but I think awareness in people and in organizations also has risen that the ability to work together is on that level. I think people and organizations also matured.
Yeah, but you say matured and it's working together. If I look at even today, so even though it's already more than 20 years ago when we started doing that stuff, even today, I think most of the organizations are not, you say, okay, organizations know Agile, the Agile Manifesto and Scrum. I disagree in that statement. That's the basic idea, the basic thing. I just plainly disagree with the statement that most organizations understand Scrum. When I enter organizations, when I do public trainings, by the way, I go back to the 11 basic elements of Scrum, and I ask people to read, to tell me what's the main purpose. So not a list. Don't say the product backlog is a list of all the to-dos. That's a practice. That's an activity. That's not purpose. So I want to have a purpose. And I don't see many people going back with the real true purpose of those elements, linked back to, for example, the principle of empirical process control. Like a product backlog increment, the main purpose there is to provide transparency so that we can inspect and adapt on it. So we inspect the increment, we adapt the product backlog accordingly so that we have the full cycle of learning on that sense. The main purpose is providing transparency. It's not about the value or a list of items. It's showing transparency on the potential future vision, and it's the learning there. And if you say many people understand Scrum, to be honest, just this one small part that I explained now, which I can continue on for another 2 hours most probably, but this small part, only this small part, I don't see organizations really grasping it. And what do I see Scrum being used for? As the new micromanagement technology. So to push people around, to on a daily basis ask what they are doing. So it's not for the true purpose what Scrum is meant to be. It's to micromanage, and that's why I love to call myself a Scrum Master and still work with Scrum, to try, at least as an expert, to try and teach people that's not what it's meant to be. I think there are people here from the Socrates community in Belgium in this webinar. They most probably can confirm that in the Socrates, so in the really software craftsmanship and testing community, they start to dislike the work Agile and Scrum for that matter. Why? Because it's being abused to punish people instead of used to actually create better businesses, like Mike is wanting to do.
Absolutely. Maybe I should be clear about that. What I wanted to raise is that I think the awareness in teams as to what is needed to work together effectively has risen. The idea of this single genius person who can sort of take a computer and revolutionize the world is not here anymore. People are used to collaborating. People are used to working together. That doesn't mean that they understand all the Scrum practices, and especially it doesn't mean that they understand and can live up to the agile values. And I think that's the real problem that I'm seeing in organizations. Now, when you mention it's being assumed, it's being abused. I see that too, and that's one of these anti-patterns you see. For example, I don't know, the ex-project manager who is now called Scrum Master, but he's wearing sneakers just to make a difference, right? So I think it's the values that still need to change. But I'm afraid that by enforcing rules like the Scrum Master, we are actually achieving the opposite. We are giving the impression that you can't send someone into a 2-day training and then the team will master Scrum. And that's not true.
For example, I have Oliver saying he thinks the whole scope is really too big to be done in one role. And that's why he is proud to be Scrum Master.
Yeah.
And he doesn't see the whole thing as something hierarchical, but he says if you ditch the Scrum Master role, then you have the full stack developer equivalent. Then everyone can do a little, but no one is an expert at it.
But isn't that?
I'd rather go to one role then. So say Scrum Master and work as a cross-functional team, just like you have team as a one role. I've been in organizations where I did the transformation where everybody was actually from a HR perspective was called engineer. Internally, to be honest, everybody had their own titles, which they invented. There were people called God of Scripting, and that's all okay for me. The thing is, people need to start to learn how to collaborate more closely. If I say I am that role, then I'm put in a box, and then I don't feel responsible for the other box anymore. And this is not helping collaboration. So lots of people think collaboration, if we put it in a process and different roles with different responsibilities, then things will turn out well. And even the more complex and bigger the problem gets, the less we need of that, and the more we need we do it together. So without having the process or boxes where responsibilities are aligned, and we can look at those things. So
now maybe we can take this whole approach of Scrum more aspirational, because obviously as soon as we talk about Scrum Master, there is some sort of, understanding. Master is something, like being a master of something and not just knowledgeable. Coming out of 2 days courses, maybe having done 4 days courses, that doesn't make you obviously a master. And I like to talk a lot about Scrum Mastery, because that, relieves us from, there is one person who is the master and other guys who are just being the slaves. But mastery is some sort of, outcome which we approach together as a whole Scrum team, how large ever it is. And there is not a single role needed for telling us what we're doing wrong. At the same time, if we had a Scrum Master, that would be obviously somebody where we would expect a lot of competence from various perspectives, where it takes a long time to grow there. And if we go once back again with a coach, team coach or soccer coach, whatever approach, who knows a soccer coach of a great soccer team who was just going through a 2-day course, learning what soccer is all about, and then standing there and saying, I'm the coach of Madrid or any other team. No, these guys are quite experienced. They usually played it themselves for a few years. So they've usually about 40 years experience in the field. Now they might be sort of soccer masters or
How
master
long does
coach.
it take to master anything, right?
Exactly. Now, coming back to what I just said, if we take it aspirational to say it would be great to achieve mastery, we are not yet there. We just started. This is perfectly fine. But it's totally different than somebody coming into the door and saying, hey guys, I'm your master. I used to be actually a software developer or I don't know, secretary or whatever last years. But now I'm your master. I'm telling you how the game works. I would rather prefer than having the whole team going into a 2-day course, because this is already a pattern. Scrum Master goes to the course, tells the other how it works. well, it would be better to have all the guys in the room. They are usually quite clever. They understand how this quite simple rules of the game work, and then see how we can work, how we can elaborate from here.
I have a few participants who are thinking that basically the panelists agree in essence, but are now discussing the name of the role. Please elaborate on that.
Well, for me, there are a couple of things. I think, in essence, Michael and myself are indeed pretty much agreeing that the role of, or the name Scrum Master has been abused in many different ways. Most probably because the market is getting into Agile more and more, and especially since HBR started writing about it, it's even getting worse. And then big consultancy companies drop people into 200 people certification trainings of 2 days, where they sit in an Ola, not even in a small room anymore. Even in an Ola, after 2 days they get the certificate, and then they say, okay, they sell them as Scrum Masters. This is why things are going berserk, and I think this is something we all agree. To become a master, you need to have experience, and there we need to go more and more into the lean thinking, I guess, where we have this kind of mentorship, mentee relationship between the different things. It's not only about the role, and that's for me the thing is, it's not only about the role. As soon as we say you have Scrum Masters and you have Agile coaches in the same organization, so we do Scrum and we have both in the organization, working on different levels, that's the moment when I see at least the system dynamics kicking, where they don't work as a team. Then you see distinction, people working on team level and team working on organizational level, just like we had all along in the organizational hierarchical structures in the past. So that's why I'm very much into saying, okay, let's stick to one role name, even though there are different levels of skill in there and people need to mentor each other, but work as a team. So that it's clear that they need to work as a team and it's not separate, that there's definitely not hierarchy, because that's also something I see as a system dynamic in the team. If as soon as you're a Scrum Master, people think like, I know I need, what are the other check boxes I need to become an Agile coach? And this is all system dynamics kicking in because of naming, because of a role naming. That's why I think it's an important aspect to discuss about. It's maybe it seems like, okay, you agree and it's trivial to put a name on it. I don't think it's that trivial if you see the system dynamics kicking in the organizations. Mike, go ahead.
Well, Pascal, I'm pointing back to you.
Okay, back to me. I go back to some of the questions in the audience. Just a moment. Sonia is saying that we are talking a lot about business agility, and it's a totally different thing, and it was not predicted by the Agile Manifesto 20 years ago. And Agile Manifesto and the frameworks based on it were through software development. And she says, now we are facing lots of different and new challenges. So Scrum came from the Agile Manifesto, but now we are up to some bigger challenges than that.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on this one. I personally don't like the business agility term too much, because it's there's not a lot of common ground on the terminology, and we don't know what we're talking about really. When I use the term agile, I try to reference the Agile Manifesto and its meaning. And I really think some of the challenges are that we are moving out of technology, which raises a few questions, because the Agile Manifesto and also the principles, they are all about software and technology. If you take an outside stance, but that's not true. If you look at it closely, I think it's all about people working together, and that's the core. To me, that's the core of Agile. So I think, in fact, if you want to move Agile out of the technology ecosystem, out of the software business, all it really needs is a sort of a search and replace. Really, the values and practices replace software by product, and then we can start from scratch. Then we can talk about values again, and not about business agility.
But maybe let me add something. Maybe let me add briefly something, because we basically focus on business agility for the reasons actually I triggered the initial conversation. I think I don't need to bother a lot about the term or common ground, because to be honest, whenever there is something new, there won't be common ground. And even in the 90s, any of the methods like Scrum and whatever we know here, they were not called Agile. There was no common ground at all, and it took one meeting over a weekend to come to the manifesto, but Agile was already a topic before. There was just multiple 20 different approaches, but the core problem was clear. The core problem around business agility is that Agile methods are not made for companies, but they're made for single teams creating any size of product, to approach Jurgen. But usually it's, they're mostly effective when the product is not huge. They're mostly effective if it's about 10 people or less. Everything else is basically, an approach towards ineffectiveness. That's what everybody knows. That's what everybody says. That's what the experience looks like. Now, company, approaching product development with a few teams on a few products, that doesn't mean the company itself is agile. And agile itself, that doesn't need a lot of big concepts. That basically just means, first of all, we're able to respond to change as a company, as a whole business, with all our strategy, portfolio, our management decisions. And after we did decisions, we're getting it out of the door. So it's a sort of sense and respond mechanism. This is business agility in terms of capability. So business agility is already a better picture. There is no method needed here, but it's actually about a competence level. And it's not absolute, it's relative, it's about survival. If I'm a bank today and my business agility is, to a certain degree, more or less fine, and there is not a lot of competition out there and not a lot of change, that's fine. But if the change, rate increases, I need a different kind of agility to sense, to innovate, to change, to basically turn the ship around quite quickly. Yeah, but I would agree that the discussion is a little bit of a different scope than what we just started with on the Scrum Master.
Yeah, probably. I just wanted to point out that I don't think we need a new term. All we basically need is make sure that business people understand the original term Agile in terms of the values and the in terms of the values rather than what we are seeing now in terms of rolling out practices across an organization.
That's the plain arrogant, the Agile manifesto. That's where I say this manifesto has been treated like a Bible for now 20 years. And by God, it failed. Now, what we keep telling is that business people don't understand it. Instead of stepping back and saying, hey, guys, the Agile manifesto doesn't understand psychology, sociology, and business. It's easy to talk about. And once again, the Agile manifesto did never talk about business. It talked about software development of small teams. But a business usually is more than small teams.
Let's
wants to react. Yes.
Let's get into your attribute of agility, Mike, instead. In order to get this kind of attribute from an enterprise level, like thousands of teams, to make it work, we need to make sure that decision mechanisms are becoming quicker, faster, easier to grasp. So if we spread around, like if it's thousands of teams and every team have their own I will use a bad word now, product backlog, because if it's 1,000 teams and they all have their own backlog, it's not product backlog, it's a team output owner backlog or something like that. It's nothing to do with product anymore. So that's where I agree, we need to bring it on a higher level, but it means as well we need to simplify structures for that matter. We need to make sure that the organization has a mirror to look into and on a frequent basis can start interacting on that. I think this is still what Scrum is giving us and also what the Agile Manifesto is bringing. It's about uncovering better ways, the collaboration, all the rest. You mentioned as well, business people do not understand. I think at least to my understanding, what I have experienced in all the organizations I've been into, is where business people like this kind of way of working very, 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 very much if you really collaborate with them and bring them into the picture. What I dislike, and that's where most of the aspects is coming from, is let's do agile HR, agile procurement, agile. So every department gets their own agile, and this is not working. So this is where I agree very much. That's where agile go berserk. So agility is more as an attribute on organizational level, and we need to see how at an organizational level how we can act upon this. And that's where I still think Scrum has a big opportunity. That's why I'm also that much in favor of large-scale Scrum, because it's still Scrum.
Yeah, I should have excluded the business people that have been hiring us. So they have been hiring us. So obviously there is a certain degree of understanding, right? So yeah.
Okay. I have some people from the attendees saying that they're still proud to be a Scrum Master. And they are asking themselves, we have many responsibilities, but if we're just starting out, how should we call ourselves then? Because we are not yet master, we are learning, but we have a Scrum Master certificate. How would you like them to call themselves?
We have something at Large Scale Scrum where we say, okay, you can start from a practical perspective with a temporary fake product owner. It doesn't mean that this temporary fake product owner cannot grow into the real one at the end, but it might be that you start with a temporary fake product owner. So make your choice.
I'm also the Agile coach. Agile coaches do have more experience or less, but if you take a coaching stance and you see your job in supporting the team and the product owner and the organization, that's, I think, Agile coach is a perfectly nice term for it, and it doesn't imply that you need to use a specific method, framework, or whatsoever. Yeah.
Okay, so back to the basic 3 questions we started with. So does it make sense to separate between an Agile coach and a Scrum Master? Steve.
I think once coming back to this, because I started with it, I fully understand that there is concern if you just started into Scrum or if you work in this approach. Of course, you get somehow, related to this role. Your whole identity will probably build upon it. And I don't assume that Scrum Masters, or Scrum Masters are working from a totally unbiased perspective, saying, "Well, no, don't worry. I'm really trying to get out of their way," which is actually something we always talk about. We always, try to bring them to, even when we do 2-day courses. But if you've been working in this role, you probably like it. I know even people, by the way, who are looking for a senior Scrum Master role. So what's actually my career path if I'm doing this since years? Is it an Agile coach? I don't think so. But anyway, I believe there is a lot of companies out there who are probably pursuing a couple of values. If they have written in an Agile manifesto or not, doesn't matter, because there are multiple values which are equally well, good, whatever. So the Agile manifesto, again, is a thing which is old, which is not up to date, and which is just one perspective. If you take Google doesn't have Scrum at all on board. You might not call them Agile. You might say, these guys are sucking at how they treat people. Their products suck, and they're actually not successful. Well, probably that's not right. There's similar companies like Netflix, whatever they're called. Pixar has been mentioned. They're pursuing these high-speed discovery, always inventing approaches. They have values on board, and they go beyond these quite limiting rules of a game, which is written on 15 pages. And I believe a complex undertaking, because that's what we're talking about here. Once again, this whole thing is about complexity, not about simple product stuff or repetitive stuff. is not limited to the view of the Scrum rules. Therefore, I believe there is more needed, and there is usually something coming into with Scrum Masters, which is called bias. And the bias then usually leads to, tweaking stuff towards where it should be.
Well, yeah, you mentioned a couple of companies which are very strong on culture. And Laussegger also came up with this, culture and values driven. If you look at, for example, what is it again, Zappos, to give you another one, which is similar to Buurtzorg, which I saw passing by somewhere in the chat. Then they, for example, they go with onboarding procedures. What is it again, 4 or 6 months? And then after 4 or 6 months, they give people like $2,000, what is it, or $2,500 to leave the company again. So to make sure that the values are set right. And I think this is a crucial element in the complete picture. Agile coach, Scrum Master, it doesn't matter. It's about living the values that are being brought with behavior inside the company throughout the complete thing. And Scrum has a couple of values. Agile has 4 values. They could be aligned or completely disaligned with the organization. That's an important aspect to look for. If Agile values are disaligned with the organizational culture or values, then it will be like 1 step forward, 2 steps backwards. This will never fly by. So, but when it's really like helpful in getting there, then I think it's still a valid thing. We always use this kind of American examples, Alibaba, to give you like go to the other side, at least for Europe, to the other side of the world. Then Alibaba is in the same sense up into extreme teaming. So also their values are driven to the extreme, and self-managing, self-designing, even self-governing parts are really allowed. If you look at many organizations, that's the main struggle. How do we get culture lived throughout the complete organization with thousands of people on a day-to-day basis, so that we can indeed step back and leave self-management work? I think the manifesto is a great thing to start with. Is it the end part? Definitely not. Do you need to contribute and collect other values of company? Of course. But culture and living the culture so that you can step back. Because if the culture is not being lived into your organization, you can never step back and allow self-organization or self-managing, self-designing or self-governing in that sense work. So if you look at Buurtzorg is self-governing. So self-governing organization without first going into, for example, a self-managing organization will never work, to my opinion. So jumping shifts, passing too much of this in-between steps, you never can become a master. To become a master, you first need to be apprentice and go through the full path. It takes years.
Okay, it's clear.
There has been,
but sorry,
there has been a question about recommendations. Just Steve, or I think it was Steve, interested to hear what we would change in the Agile Manifesto.
Indeed.
And there's probably multiple ideas what to change, but what I usually tell our Scrum Master course attendees and any other is an update to the Agile Manifesto, which was actually written by one of its originators. It's called Beyond the Agile Manifesto. And if you look at it, it's here. It's simple URL, agilemanifesto.org, was originated by Ken Beck. And it's already 8 years old again too, but you just see the change here in relation to the speed of change, what we're actually all about. For example, customer collaboration is a nice thing, but who knows their customers anymore? And to which extent are customers actually unclear or new of them discovered? So customer discovery over customer collaboration. I always liked, not only to respond to change, but actually to trigger change if you don't want to be in the second place. And working software is, as per the lean startup method since 10 years, probably the least thing you want to see. You want to have validated learning. So, these are just some examples you could tweak the Agile Manifesto to, even done by one of its authors. And last year I spoke to another author, Alistair Coburn, who just said the same thing. The way we see business today, he said, is totally different from when we worked on these problems in the 90s. And obviously that needs changes, like we just see it here on the screen. So just to this question.
Okay. And what is the role for Scrum Masters in that picture? or Agile coaches?
In which picture?
The Agile Manifesto, the updated Agile Manifesto. I see some things that Scrum Masters can help a company or whatever.
Yeah, they could, but I would say they play the same role as in the original manifesto, exactly none. Because the Agile Manifesto was not about Scrum, obviously. It was 17 people. Some of them were coming from Scrum, but it was going beyond.
Okay, Jurgen will be right back.
One comment from my side, maybe. I still believe that we are not done with the Agile Manifesto in terms of getting the most out of it, and I think reaching a common ground on what these most important 4 points in terms of values are was a big achievement, and I think it would be interesting to have that conversation again. But I don't think it's helpful to have 10 versions of manifestos flying around, and that's why I'm not too happy about sort of variations. And I'm seeing variations from big consulting firms around that I'm absolutely not happy with, for example, which makes the whole thing even more complicated.
Okay.
There is one nice thing here. The first thing is these triggers for change come from these guys who originated the stuff. So it's nice to see them, coming back and rethink. And on the other hand side, it's a quite funny statement, Michael, because it's all about change. Agile is all about change and adaptation and, dealing with change. But as soon as there is something, and I think that's the same as we have with the Scrum Master, we are actually stopping to be, able to question what we're doing. We believe we found the stone of wisdom, and then it's not changing anymore. And once again, these methods are 20 years old, 30 years old, actually. And some of this stuff is still valid. Of course, I totally agree. But organizations look differently today. The business arena looks totally different today, and it's changing towards directions we can't imagine. Some approaches are still useful, but we need, to rethink how we work on it.
Absolutely, I agree. But I think a lot of value lies in the common ground, and I would love to have that conversation. Maybe it would be a good follow-up thing. In fact, yeah, that's it.
I do like the Ken Beck example on moving on, and you're mentioning organizations, the world is different, I think, as well. I still, for me, the first sentence in the Agile Manifesto is still the best one, uncovering better ways. So I'm always open to that. Then again, I'm also very much into lean thinking. And the first thing that is coming there, to master something, you first need to master the basics. So before you start adapting and changing stuff, you first need to make sure that you have mastered the basics. So Ken Beck's example, I very much comply to. I see the value, and I do understand Ken Beck has mastered the basics first. The thing is, I see many organizations using it as an excuse not to even go into the basics and keep the same misery ongoing as they have always been into. And that's what I dislike about this thing. So I'm okay in moving on and evolution and even revolution on that sense. But at least make sure you understood and you mastered the basics before changing, adapting, and creating something new in that sense. The same thing with the Agile Manifesto. So Michael Laussegger, I truly believe, okay, software development is maybe not in place anymore. Then again, software is eating the world. So if you say, okay, product development, which kind of product development is still out there, which is excluding anything from software, it's going to be very limited. And maybe in the far future, zero. So if it's about setting up a factory line, so a factory running there, which has been designed up front. So the design of the factory line, I think Agile related frameworks are pretty well suited. But as soon as a factory is there, there's little variation. And if little variation is there, I don't think this kind of Agile way of working is necessary. But then again, everywhere where this kind of Agile way of working could be useful, then I would say, okay, try to stick with the standard and the basics first. And if you find and uncover better ways, great. But don't use it as a first escape route, which I see quite often just as an excuse to keep going as they were before.
And those basics are Scrum then?
For me, I would stick with the basics in the Agile Manifesto, the 4 values and uncovering better ways. And Scrum is, to my opinion, so to my personal opinion, a very, very good a way to give you the mirror so that you can start uncovering. People think like roles and process too much, and I think that's the wrong way. It's a mirror that enforces you to see, to provide transparency into the organization so that you can start uncovering. If you don't have a mirror somewhere, then how do you know you look fat?
I totally agree with what you just said. I mean, I have to start where I am. So if I want to, you know, become better at sports, I need to start where I am. I cannot just dream about, you know, marathon in, I don't know, 3 hours. If in reality it would take me 16 hours, or probably I even wouldn't make it at all. At the same time, I don't believe Scrum relates to the basics at all. So if I say validated learning over working software, you know, this is like lean startup saying, we did a lot of Scrum here, but actually 100% useless. So why should I learn something which is actually useless in the second place? I need to learn how to develop software, but this doesn't imply I need to do Scrum. So this is quite important at this point. And at the same time, of course, the challenge bar from the outside raises. For example, I believe we talk a lot about it, you know, like saying where's Scrum or anything alike even applicable, like in the complex and not in the simple world. But let's be honest, in a few years, the simple world will even not be relevant anymore because we're currently working on that all machines take over most of the simple stuff. So every organization is now invited to think about their future is definitely only about complicated or complex, more complex. But anyway, I believe we're getting to you know, different topics here, and which might, you know, lead to a second webinar. I'm not sure how you think about it.
Well, let me ask you a question to all 3 of you. How would you see the role of a Scrum Master within, let's say, 5 years, if it's changing that much? Will there still be Scrum Masters? Will there still be Agile coaches?
As Agile is conquering the world and HBR is writing, and Agile equals Scrum these days, that's where all the mistakes are coming from, to my opinion, and large consultancy companies jumping on this to earn a buck of money. So all of that system dynamics will lead to the Scrum Master being dismissed, not good enough. And there will be something new coming up, and to my understanding, based back on principles which are already been there for decades, even longer than the Agile Manifesto and Agile as such. So we will go back to the principles as they were from decades, and there will be a new name coming up, but strong, maybe a bit stronger, but really, really, really still focused on the principles and not being diluted by bigger consultancy companies into something that is just a name and enforcing people into micromanagement. Because most of the things where this kind of Agile or Scrum Manifesto, Scrum Master thing is coming up with, it's based on principles which are already there for decades. I'm happy at least that Scrum and Agile conquered the world so big and so fast and so good that at least some of those basic principles came across. Not enough, to my opinion, and that's the quest for the new manifesto or the new framework to come. So how can we get the old aged, for decades known principles more known into the world?
Okay. Mike or Michael, let's hear from you. Does it still exist in 5 years?
I believe, and I'm not so much looking after Scrum, but I believe we're now, you know, approaching a world where it's getting quite fast, where, you know, a lot of technology surrounds us, and I believe we want to really, really focus more on the people factor, how we collaborate, how we interact. And part of this is obviously still a problem today, how we communicate, how we actually solve problems together. So what I still see is a big and huge and ever-growing demand in terms of coaching competence. And I'm talking about competence for organizations, however organizations will look like. And I believe this will probably be fostered by educated, maybe Scrum Masters, also Agile coaches or general coaches. But I also believe that leadership, like managers, as we treat it today, will, probably move more into the role of being great facilitators, communicating differently, approaching coaching capabilities. So this is my perspective of an organization of the future. So therefore, I believe this competence is very, very important to grow it in organizations.
I love mic testing, so collaboration and people. I even think beyond that, and that's my biggest interest these days, and my biggest learning and exploration is how do we get people to collaborate with AI and deep machine learning? Basically, how do we get people to collaborate with machines that are smarter than they are? This is my learning, my biggest quest today.
Okay, Jurgen. Let's hear from Michael, his view on Agile and Scrum in 5 years.
Yes, I'm a bit concerned that if Scrum and Scrum Alliance doesn't move forward quickly and sort of changes, or I don't know, I don't want to give any suggestions towards Scrum Alliance, but I'm a bit concerned that Scrum Masters are the next sort of roles which are going to maintain a command and control environment in organizations that want to be agile but do not master the basics. And I think there is a big problem that many organizations are using Scrum and are really sort of killing the initial intent of becoming more agile. So I think many organizations are dropping the project manager from their org charts because they want to get rid of this image of command and control. And I'm a bit concerned that the same thing might happen to the Scrum Masters in future in organizations that embrace agility and honestly, I believe within the next 5 years, the Scrum Master is not it's not going to be removed from org charts, and not a lot will change probably at that end. But for those organizations who take agility or agile, take it serious, I think they would just not rely that much on Scrum Masters as in the past.
Okay, so some people are voting for a second webinar on business agility, I think, with the same panelists. I think the topic is coming to an end. And if it's okay for you, I would like to end the webinar today. Is that okay? Are there still things on the Scrum Master role or Agile coach role that we haven't mentioned that we should have today?
I'm just wondering if we go into a second or another webinar with Mike and Michael, then what would be the topic?
I think it would be on business agility and how you see things from there. How you see organizations becoming more agile, if you call it business agility or not.
I think being or approaching it in an agile manner ourselves, we could still try via LinkedIn or any other social media channel to figure out what the topic really could be. Yeah. I could already think about some other interests, like, for example, how would you organize a huge group of Scrum Masters inside an organization? You know, the role of the head of Scrum Master stuff, for example, or Scrum Master team lead. That's a nice topic. I love too. But let's figure out on LinkedIn.
Let's not start with team leads, please. So that's already out of order. The short answer is more as a community. But anyhow, maybe another topic. It's close to the ending time, so good for Pascal.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Then I would like to send big kudos to Co-Learning for organizing this webinar for free. I also would like to send kudos to Mike, Michael, and Jurgen to join in onto the discussion and to respect each other. Thank you for that. And thank you all for the participants to be here and enrich the discussion with your questions. Jurgen will produce the video and publish it somewhere online. I think it will be in the LinkedIn channel where that will be. So thank you all for today and have a great evening.